This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, sorry, let's start again. So as I said, this is the weekly meeting of the project of the Council on Participatory Democracy, which was originally called by Humans, European Alternatives, ICIT Foundation, and a few other organizations back in March, with the goal of starting to discuss with different citizens and European networks on the instruments of participatory democracy, how they can strengthen and improved, with the purpose of providing the citizens tools to take back Europe as we wish it works. The first council had a focus on the conference on the future of Europe, that at that time was very much in the process of the making of, with a lot of limitation and issues, and the existing instruments, particularly the European Citizen Initiative and the petition, and an overall discourse around the democratization process of the European Union. We left that meeting with two main actions. One was the petition to the European Parliament for a joint response to the COVID-19 emergency. And I'm going to update in a few seconds on that. And also with the purpose of finding additional self-convocating assemblies and moments to keep on the discussion on this instrument. We already met a couple of times after that edition, and we left last week meeting with the idea of convocating a second meeting of the Council on Participatory Democracy on the 20th of April, potentially the 10th of April, as another opportunity for gather multiple organizations and people together to keep refining the debate and the conversation that we had, to transform that in initiatives. On the petition to the European Parliament side, last week we had confirmation that there is going to be an urgency procedure activated for our petition and all the petitions on the coronavirus topic. This is going to happen by the Petty Committee in a dedicated session in May. So this shows in practice and learning by doing some of the limits of the petition instruments, for example, with regards to the concept of urgency of petitions. We gathered 70,000 signatures for that. Very strong endorsement. Probably the biggest one is one of the former EU commissioner of the last commission, Violeta Bulc, and we are currently working with a lot of activists also of the Council on Participatory Democracy to increase the endorsement towards the next plenary session, which is going to be next week. Today, I think we should focus on the second meeting of the Council on Participatory Democracy, how to call for it, and how to structure it in such a way that can increase the debate around the same three lines of analysis and action. So how a conference on the future of Europe should look like, considering that the existing one probably is definitely not going to happen. How to strengthen the information and power of participatory democracy instruments, but also how these can be applied in different national and transnational scenarios. Last week in the meeting, for example, we spent some time talking about the Polish case where the rule of law emergency is gonna break even more than in Hungary. Ways. The last bit, very important, the guys at European Alternatives, which are also among the organizations that called for the Council on Participatory Democracy, are kicking off a process that is going to end up in a big event on the 9th of May for an open space for discussion around an ideal participatory process for a potential conference on the future of Europe in terms of scope, but also in terms of how citizens should be engaged, for example, through innovative instruments such as solicitation-based citizen assemblies. As humans, but also with other people that are in this call, we are working toward this goal. And today with us, there is Martin de Groot, who is one of the persons that's working on this project led by European Alternatives. I think this moment that we have is a good time to put together brains on how we could contribute with the Council on Participatory Democracy to this other event, and how bond can be taken between the different instruments and actionability of the instruments in a bigger project. So this is my intro just to set the tone. I think what we should come up with at the end of this meeting is how to call for the next meeting of the Council on Participatory Democracy, how to include the topics that we mentioned, and which type of people we want to invite, and which type of approach we want to have for the next meeting in terms of elaboration of proposals, analysis, and alternatives. I think an underlining topic that we should never forget is that participatory democracy doesn't work if citizens are not aware of the existence of the instruments. So there is the element of information on existing instruments, on potential new instruments. For example, talking about the conference on the future of Europe, there is a lot of concern about it among organizations and experts. But I guess if we go in the streets or in the digital streets, asking citizens what do they know about it, they probably don't know about it. And the same goes for petitions, European citizen initiatives, and things like that. So I think a core pillar of the next meeting of the Council of Participatory Democracy should be around the information element. So these are the lines on which I think we should discuss together, bringing as much as possible what we currently do, what our organizations are doing, but also how we can create a new moment of discussion in the second half of April, 20th of April ideally, and how we should call for a next meeting. So that's my introduction. I would ask Marco Cappato to add on the top of this, yes, and then around the table.
Thank you very much, Virginia. I think your introduction was very complete and clear. And so what remains to me maybe to add is that trying to answer your question, so who should we involve? I think it's important that we do not keep our debate among concerned organization and pro-European concerned organization. I think we should involve, as you said, people from the media world in order to understand with them what could be asked as an improvement on the information on citizen participation. People on the technological world, because it is impossible to talk about participation without talking about technologies of participation nowadays. For example, which kind of technology the European Union could propose as a benchmark, or even as an open open access technology that could be used at the national local level for citizen participation. So the technological aspect together with the regulamentative aspect, they have to go along together. So technologies are allowing things that were unbelievable, unconceivable 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So we should also talk about how technology could boost the actual instrument of citizen participation. And the other idea could be members of parliament, because for the most important reform at the EU level, we would need a modification of the treaties, of the basic rules of the European Union. This is true, but it is also true that we know how difficult it is. So we should also check where we can go as far as possible with the existing rules, involving the parliament and opening up procedure. You made the example of petitions. Petition is a very weak instrument, but the European Parliament could give to the petition instrument much more importance without changing the rules. Even the issue of the information that you mentioned, a lot of the improvement could be done without changing the treaties. For example, creating a public service of information at the European level regarding European citizen initiatives and petition to the European Parliament. So we can do a lot with the existing treaties, and members of the European Parliament should be a target and an actor very important to be involved with. Finally, the issue of a citizen assembly by sortition, I think, is a very important thing. And if we create parallel events like, or even more ambitious, constitutionally self-convened assemblies, I think we should give space to the sortition element in order to innovate participatory democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. I would like, since Martin joined, I don't know if you want to say a few words on the work that is happening around the self-convocated assembly, and maybe how we could use the moment of the Council on Participatory Democracy to maybe put together some people to, I don't know, Martin, if you want to, you mentioned that you also listened to the previous event, so say whatever you want.
Thank you, Virginia. And thanks for inviting me to this call. Indeed, I already checked online on YouTube some of your previous discussions, so that's an easy way to follow a bit of what you guys are doing. Let me first maybe introduce myself. So my name is Maarten de Groot. I currently work for the Bertelsmann Foundation in Germany in their Democracy and Participation in Europe project, mostly working at the moment on a study on various EU participation instruments, including petitions, ECI, European elections as well, but also citizens' dialogues and so forth. But I'm here more in personal capacity. Because I'm also a member of DiEM25. I'm also a member and previously worked for the ECI campaign. And indeed, as Virginia mentioned, I was also part of these, so far, the 2 calls that were initiated by European Alternatives on the broad idea, as I would see it, of self-organizing a way, sort of a citizens' conference on the future of Europe, a structured process, a structured participatory and deliberative transnational process in which we engage citizens in a fundamental reflection on the future of Europe and something that has a concrete output. That's, as far as I see it, sort of a bit the starting point of that discussion. Of course, the people who've been in the call all had their own views to what extent, I guess, the official conference is will be a credible process. Well, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. In the way I look at this initiative that is sort of emerging from these calls initiated by European Alternatives, is that regardless of how we look at the official process, now is the time for citizens to self-organize, especially arguably because of the crisis, the even more fundamental crisis that's happening with Corona. Now is the time to self-organize a process, because independently of what EU institutions are doing, I think it's worth to develop more collective action, civic power as citizens, basically. And in the way what I understand so far from the Council on Participatory Democracy is that you guys are trying to, first of all, create a space for discussion and engagement on participatory democracy, but also to practice it, not only to preach for it, but also to practice it by means of, okay, when we get different citizens and organizations together, what are the initiatives that we want to develop using the existing tools? So I think in the way I look at it is this idea of, let's say, self-organized citizens conference on the future of Europe, something that perhaps in the long term could ideally turn into sort of a permanent citizens chamber, possibly or ideally selected indeed by random stratified random selection. That it is the type of initiative that in a way also comes out of the space that you guys created, even though, I mean, of course, people have discussions in different places. So in that sense, I see the two as spaces as complementary. But in terms of my own interest in this topic, I see the 9th of May, which is as a kickoff, as a starting point for a structured participatory deliberative process. That if we want that to be credible and successful as a self-organized process, it would require a lot of resources. It would require a lot of civil society support. So it's a long shot, arguably, to make that happen. But I think now is the time to at least try. And I see the 9th of May as sort of the public launch of a challenge that we pose to ourselves as citizens of Europe and civil society organizations caring about the future of Europe, recognizing the very fundamental crisis that the Union is facing. And ultimately, in my view, I'm not saying that this is the way it should be framed from the start. I think it's one option, but ultimately, I think we do need to think about treaty change. That is what I'm thinking about, because what the EU, in my view, needs is fundamental democratization. And yes, small victories can be obtained within the treaties, but the big battles, not. So yeah, it is more that type of perspective, sort of the structured perspective, that at the moment I'm mostly interested in. Thanks for giving me the floor, and I hope I was not too long. Sorry.
Thank you, Martin. I just have a question for you. Maybe within the space of the Council on Participatory Democracy, we could have some moment of, how they say in English, shedding the light, or kind of creative a highlight on the Conference on the Future of Europe concept, not the one necessarily, but how an ideal sortition-based involvement of citizens within the space of a process of dialogue between institutions and the citizens, a real one. So how to design the ideal process, maybe starting from what, I don't remember the name of the lady that spoke at the last meeting, but she also mentioned that the European Parliament proposal on the Conference on Future of Europe was the more interesting one. So maybe what we could try to do to use that space also to gather momentum toward the 9th of May. Maybe one option could be to involve, for example, some MEPs that were more concerned on the Conference on the Future of Europe and some experts on processes and participation, so that we have a moment of analysis that can then be brought to the 9th of May somehow, and to put together some experts that maybe wouldn't join a working group or like meetings, organizational meetings, but we can try to design an ideal process based on feedback, on existing analysis and things like that. I don't know, how do you see that? Maybe we should talk about it, but maybe this could be a way to use a space that already exists. We have hundreds of people that subscribe to the first one of the meeting, so I guess there will be more people if we work correctly. And this type of analysis, maybe with Lorenzo Mineo, who is our resident expert on sortition assemblies, we could try to have a session on this designing process that could work for a self-convocated assembly, although ideally it shouldn't be a self-convocated but a real institutional transformative moment. So, I mean, in an ideal scenario, there is a point where things need to become institutional. So, I don't know, this might be an option.
Interesting indeed. for me, though, I think what I would be even more interested in, let's put it that way, is to have a discussion. And if you want to provide that space for discussion during the next edition of the Council on Participatory Democracy, that would be great. To have a discussion on how to self-organize a citizens' conference on the future of Europe and debate how that could work. Knowing that it's a very ambitious thing if you want something like that to be credible and not just any other initiative that is out there, because of course there are already so many initiatives. Because the debate on the Conference on the Future of Europe has taken place, of course, since July last year, basically. Many organizations have organized also, I mean, in my work in the foundation, we've organized debates on this and many others. The European Parliament has already taken in its position. So in that sense, our chances of directly influencing the EU interinstitutional agreement that is still to be expected would have been through the European Parliament, I would say. I'm not so sure how much there's to be done now. And in general, the whole state of the official process is so uncertain. It's clearly not a priority at the moment for the European leaders, that I think we need to draw our own conclusions and really start self-organizing. That's how I look at it at the moment.
Lorenzo Mineo, who also knows. Yeah. Remind me which was the country where the first self-organized citizen assembly happened? British Columbia in Canada, or? Yeah, British Columbia in Canada, definitely. Maybe something before in Netherlands. Are you talking about the first one back in the 90s, probably, or the beginning of 2000? Anyway, I think that this meeting that we are having with other organizations, including European Alternatives, that Virginia was mentioning about possible, let's say, counter conference, we could call it in a provocatory way like this, self-convocated by citizens, could be a very good idea, and we may be the ones, the Council on Participatory Democracy could be the one who has the role to introduce the issue of participatory democracy and the European instruments of participatory democracy within that conference. So one thing that with Virginia we are working on is the reform of participatory democracy instruments, requesting equal dignity between electoral democracy and participatory democracy. Because well, I don't have to convince you, but you know that there are so many studies also in reliable scientific reviews saying that deliberative democracy nowadays helps people to not respond with extreme answer to problems, because when you put people together and you let them discuss on an issue, it's easier to have a compromise solution, and rather than what happened in election with the populism and all that. So the issue of having more and more equal dignity on participatory democracy and electoral democracy is very important nowadays. And I think that if we would be able to draft maybe in the next council a proposal for equal dignity and for bringing this issue in the counter conference, that could be a good mission for us. Equal dignity, of course, means in terms of financing, but also in terms of information and all that. So just an idea for a campaign. Thank you, Lorenzo. So I see Omri that is writing the name of, invoking Monica Frassoni. So I think Monica is not with us today, but Omri, if you want to elaborate on the...
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, you just asked before who the lady was who spoke last week, and I just thought if I was asking whether you meant her.
No,
But
it was during the meeting on the self-convocating assembly, so I don't remember
okay, so something else. Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. So overall, just a quick response. Just to say, I think the direction we're moving in the conversation is great. I would be very happy to help connect as many partners as we have and we can to the event on the 9th of May, because I think it's useful, like Martin was saying, and hi Martin, there are a lot of initiatives out there, and I think it's useful for everyone to connect them just for added impact and to added visibility to avoid duplication and so on. So I'm happy to do that. And maybe we can figure out what the best way is. Maybe we can have some kind of shared document where people can write down different networks, different initiatives that we can connect. And yeah, I mean, if there's any more concrete planning with regards to the event on the 9th of May, or things that need to be done to set it up, what kind of technology are we going to use? Is this going to be, you know, several Zoom calls? Is there another tool that we're going to use to bring hundreds or thousands of people on board? Is it going to be one event or several? So all of that is useful and good to talk about, and whether there are contributions that different organizations can make, that would be good to establish. And then on the more theoretical level of participation in general, I agree with everyone, so I won't repeat anything. Just one thing is, recently we've had AC Grayling, the philosopher, join the board of Alliance for Europe, and he's been running a participatory democracy program in the UK with different local authorities. So I would be happy to involve him with this and see what his interest would be. I don't know what he will say about it or what his availability is, so I'm not making any commitment, but I'm happy to talk to him about it. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Omri. Just to clarify, and I think it's always helpful to clarify what is happening where, because given that we all work on the same stuff in different manners, it's good to have the stuff. So the event on the 9th of May, the big one, is organized, led by European Alternatives, but with a variety of networks. And I think on that specific instance, Martin just shared here the link to the next meeting, and I think, Martin, we can ask European Alternatives to involve Omri on that specific instance. Whilst I think, Omri, what we can do together is how to have on the 20th of April a moment, as you said, more theoretical, or looking between the merge between theory and practice on the participatory democracy element specifically. And I think this contact that you mentioned, and maybe we could work together on, since you have the mission for Alliance for Europe on specific policies and initiatives and try to match them together. I think maybe we could work together on how on multiple topics that are like, as I mentioned in other situations, like civil rights or environment or other things, how we could maybe develop a session around policies, organizations that have or people that have a need to develop policies and transform them into action, and maybe we could try and work together on how to apply participatory democracy to specific instances, so we can have two lines of action and use the 20th as a stepping stone toward the 9th, for example, or something like this. Maybe this could be an approach. I don't know what you think about it.
Sounds fantastic to me. So
cool, that's great. If anyone, so we are not obliged to stay connected until 7. But
just a quick thing. I also share the view that we need a deep reform of the EU institutions, so even a modification of the EU treaties and so on. I just think that the way to reach that point is also to use at the maximum extent as much as possible the existing tools. So I'm not saying that through the existing tools we can achieve the kind of reform that we need, but the existing tools are needed in the path that we will lead to this result. Also because even if we are able to involve in a huge assembly, in a non-institutional assembly, raising funds and so on, to create a big thing. At the end, the outcome of this big thing will need to have an institutional also link in a way. So we need to propose to someone somewhere. So we cannot just have a nice event, even if it's a huge event, but which ends there. We need to create the condition for politician and institutional representative to take the result of this initiative and to transform it also in concrete reform. So I think the two approaches are not alternatives. They should be pursued both together.
I'm staying silent just to leave space for others to talk. So,
can you hear me? I'm Charles Jenkins.
hi, Charles. Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. I'm just obviously I'm from a country that's no longer a member of the EU, though we are kind of still in a transition period. I mean, what my big comment is that whatever the future of the EU is going to be enormously influenced by how it seemed to react and deal with the present crisis. Now, there's quite a lot being discussed about how it might cooperate or not on economic matters, but I don't really get the impression that the cooperation on medical matters is all that effective. I know that the Commission is certainly trying to do something, but it doesn't seem to be all that effective what it's doing. And I'm wondering whether, what the reasons for that are. It seems to me a bit that perhaps it's too legalistic. There's sort of tendering process for procurement, which seems to be too time consuming in the present situation. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but that's just my impression. But I do think that it's going to leave an influence on how citizens think about Europe once the crisis is over. And I think we need to be thinking about how it might be reacting better. As I say, there is a lot of discussion about how to deal with the economic aspects, and I'm not commenting on that, but I'm commenting on the medical aspects. And I think there could be more scientific aspects also, technological aspects. And I think there could be more done. In the UK, I mean, there's sometimes the government's being criticised for not participating in EU schemes, which it could do. It's still being offered to do so, but it's not really clear that it would benefit hugely from doing so because the schemes don't seem to be all that effective. So that's my main comment. Thank you.
Charles, sorry, since we finally met, Manlio spoke about you quite a lot. You are a journalist, yes. So I was wondering, from a role of the media perspective, in terms of knowledge and awareness of, let's call it, alternative ways to do politics. So let's say not party-related politics, but instruments of participatory democracy, so we all agree on the term. How do you think we could, and who do you think we could involve in a process of thinking how the media could give more value to the initiatives that come from the citizens and are not based on representative traditional politics in a meeting such as the Council on Participatory Democracy, but also, as I said, toward other initiatives.
Well, obviously, one has to try and get some. I mean, I'm not an active journalist anymore. To get active journalists interested in what you're doing, one can try. I think that one can try and do one best interested, but it's up to the journalists whether they do. I don't know. In Italy, do you manage to involve journalists in Italian newspapers?
My question is more at this stage, what goes in the mind or in the wallet of newspapers or in the, I don't know, that prevents journalists usually to consider newsworthy an initiative that is, for example, a collection of signatures for an official petition to the Commission, compared to a statement, a random thought of a leader of a party. Like, what is the element that can drive in a transformative way the way how the media look at initiatives that are led by the citizens using democratic instruments? So it's more in analytical terms, if you think there is an angle that we can pursue in a moment like the Council on Participatory Democracy on the role of the media in informing the citizens about their rights to use instruments. So this was more the question. I don't know if it makes sense, but
well, it has. You have to be able to, as a journalist, you have to be able to make a good story out of it. So I think it has to be a little bit more than just a well-meaning initiative to participatory democracies. You've got to have something a bit more concrete going. And as I say, I think it's at the moment clearly all the newspapers are focused on one issue. So that's the issue. Perhaps you should try and focus on as well.
thanks.
Yes, and this is why with other organization we were talking about this counter conference as the way by which European citizen wants to address the recovery of the COVID crisis, basically. So searching and finding a link between the current emergency and the Participatory Democracy conference that we want to build up.
Yeah, and maybe I can just jump in and add that, I mean, anything we do will be framed necessarily in the context of this crisis. So what we are doing essentially is given a huge amount of urgency by the fact that we need to put out a vision of what we want the EU to look like after this. And I think that's a good angle for journalists as well, potentially.
So we have, thanks Omri, we have Samuele Nannoni from Oderal.
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone. So, yeah, I just wanted to say a few things. The thing that I think that obviously it would be very important to bring the that is our point, what we think. I mean, the thing that democracy, participatory democracy is an important tool, and that it would be necessary to strengthen it in the future. And so I think it would be necessary and important to bring this theme into the official conference on the future of Europe. But I think that it would be very important to have what we are discussing about. I mean, a parallel and self-organized and conference on the future of Europe, and that will discuss on the theme of participatory democracy, and at the same time would be the practical proof that participatory democracy can effectively be possible also at European level, also if people, for example, like in this moment, cannot meet each other, so in a telematic way. What Omri just wrote down here, I agree. I totally agree. We have to let citizens do their part to think about what will be the Europe of the future, and at the same time, and obviously the participatory democracy will be part of this Europe of the future. And throughout this self-organized conference, we'll be able to prove that we can do it. We can use participatory democracy, and we should look at what, for example, I don't know if there is someone from Ireland or from Belgium, but what they did in Ireland in 2011 with the citizen organization, as well in Belgium with the G1000, is the self-organized citizen assembly, in that case from the bottom up, so organized from the society, that had the intention to let citizens discuss on specific topics, but at the same time also to show to politicians and to institutions that participatory democracy and citizen assembly can be done and can produce important results. So just to show and to prove, in our case, to European institutions that we can do what we are done.
Thank you, Samuele. You also got endorsement from the audience by Michele Fiorillo, aka Tommaso Campanella.
Which is my computer.
I love it.
The computer of my brother, actually. I don't know if I can jump into this because.
Yes, you can.
Yes, I think there was someone other. No, this is really central, and maybe really we need that in the next council, the 20th of April, we have some people from these experiments coming in the meeting. Tomorrow I have a call with Jonathan Moscovich from G1000, who is also among the founder of Civico Europa. He's in a difficult moment because of his father, who is under coronavirus, unfortunately. But I say to him that we are developing these kind of things, and he want to know more. And I will try to, if you agree, I will try to ask him if he wants to join on the 20th, so he could share directly as G1000 representative what they have done. And then maybe also this experience from Iceland, Ireland. I don't know if you are trying already to get some contacts, because really I think what was saying Samuele, Martin, but I think almost everyone here, we need really to show that we can self-organize in order then to not to be institutionalized, to become institution, let's say, as a European Citizen Assembly, European Council of Citizens, whatever name we want to do to this type of deliberative and participatory process. And also the transnational element, I think, is the originality of this process and exercise we are trying to do, because at least in words there was Macron, you remember, that launched this idea of having citizens conventions, he named it, but then then called it later on consultations, which is a bit weaker, but was always starting from national level. and here we are trying to, and also in the process coordinated by European Alternative, we are trying to start from transnational level, which is the real originality of the thing. And yes, so yeah, maybe if you are thinking to also here to organize some working group, or I don't know, to share some planning of the program of the next council, maybe we can also collaborate on it.
Yeah, I think what I will try to do, I hope tomorrow, is to put together a sort of mapping of what we are discussing today and in the last meetings in terms of what could look like the agenda, taking into account, for example, the media element, the technological element, this shaping of our transnational process, and how our ideal citizen assemblies process should look like. I think this could be an angle, maybe in putting together the experience of self-convocated assemblies, the MEPs that worked on the proposal of the European Parliament, and some maybe academic element on the potential structure. I think this is definitely an angle. And then there is the policy and initiative elements suggested by Omri, and the use of the instruments, maybe based on the petition experience that we are currently working on. We could have a focus on urgent matters suggested by the citizens, how the reaction time frames, best practice in different countries. For example, there is a nice system developed in, Carsten made me the introduction to the modeling. I think it was Lithuania. I don't remember the name of the person that introduced me that. Based on the ECI development, they developed a tool so that citizens can submit very easy petitions to their government, and then they kick off the commission process directly once they achieve a certain number of signatures within the parliament, and then it's the parliament that comes up with a technical proposal. So it's not the citizen that needs to be a legal person to come up with a proposal. I will go back to my notes, but I think that was a good angle. Martin says, one suggestion, if you would be willing to give space on the agenda on the 20th February meeting on this idea of self-organizing a citizen conference, perhaps the working group working on this, some of us here, could present a draft plan for this and share with participants in advance, so there is a concrete basis for discussion and to connect the initiatives. Yeah, I think it makes sense, Martin. I think maybe drawing from the examples mentioned by Samuele and Lorenzo of self-organized citizen assemblies, we could come up with some best practice. And I remember among the participants of the last Council on Participatory Democracy, there were some projects for European citizen assemblies. So we could ask that people to contribute to these highlights specifically, so that the output becomes something available as a sort of a blueprint, or maybe not a blueprint, but a first draft or something like that. Indeed. Okay. Anyone else wants to say something? Maybe Carsten's daughters want to say something. Martin.
I have to apologize because I need to go in 5 minutes. I have another call. But if I may just respond to one thing that Marco Cappato, if I got it correctly, shared before regarding sort of the complementarity of using, on the one hand, wanting to change the treaties and having sort of so-called fundamental democratization, and on the other hand, using existing instruments. I fully agree. I think, of course, as citizens, as democrats, we need to use all instruments available to push for the democratic change that we need in Europe. I guess the reason one thing that's the reason why at the moment I'm quite convinced of this idea of self-organizing something is that I have the feeling that not only is there sort of a collective action problem at the level of the EU institutions. I would say definitely there's a collective action problem there. I think that they have no clue anymore how to reform the current treaties, for example. They just don't know, and that's a very fundamental problem, or they don't know that it's just a conundrum of some sort, a deadlock that I don't see easily resolved. And I think it seems to be the main reason why also the current conference on the future of Europe is being blocked at the moment, despite even the coronavirus, because it obviously raises the expectation of treaty change, but they cannot see it through for understandable reasons. But I also believe that there is a bit of a collective action problem on the side of civil society. On the one hand, civil society is by definition multifaceted and all kinds of different perspectives. And yet there are times that you as civil society want to form one front and be effective in forming that front. I think this is one of these times that we need this urgently. And this is also, I think, why initiatives like ours and yours are emerging. But I believe that's ideally something sort of a permanent self-organized citizens assembly, sort of the European version of the Belgian G1000, but then ideally permanently and annually rotated, could provide a space for civil society to self-organize more effectively. Because in my view, at least, random selection of citizens and civil society it's far from mutually exclusive, but it could create sort of a center of gravity around which civil society could organize itself by presenting proposals to this democratic forum of randomly selected citizens. So this is why I'm pushing at the moment for, let's say, this idea of self-organizing, while not denying that ultimately it's the challenge of indeed how to connect self-organized efforts to institutional or more generally societal change, because that's always the challenge.
Yes, thank you very much.
So 1 second. Okay, so I didn't love to talk, but I have 3 loud children or whatever. Okay, I see Karsten is listening and taking care of the kids. Okay, so Michele is gonna share via email a draft of an extension of the G1000 at EU level. We drafted 2 years ago together with Jonathan. Maybe could help for brainstorming. Perfect. So I think we're gonna try to create some moments during the council that can have output documents somehow on the different angles that we have. And I'm gonna follow up, and me and Lorenzo and Samuele are also in the group of European alternatives, so we can make sure that the steps are aligned somehow and preparatory to each other's. So I think we can call it off today, unless someone else wants to add something.
Yeah, maybe just very short.
Yes,
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry just to jump into this here. So, I thought maybe it might be interesting to invite one of the organizers of the G1000 event, yeah, like Yves de Jager or David van Raybroek, with whom I work closely together. In case this is of relevance for you, please just let me know in case you think we should invite them for our next meeting.
Yeah, it would be very important.
Okay.
It would be very useful.
I will call him soon. And as said, I have several kids around me I have to take care of, so I can only partially listen right now.
Even if you speak 1 minute with good inputs is perfect. So thanks very much. Okay, cool. So I will circulate the notes both within us for the Council on Participatory Democracy, but also with the guys for the working group for the 9th of May, so that we find the points where one initiative can lead to the other, basically. And so have a nice spring evening. I hope the sun is shining for all of you.
Thank you.
Grazie, Virginia.
Thanks a lot.
Ciao, ciao. Grazie.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.